Okay, we'll wait one more moment. Morning. Want to finish up Farewell to Arms today so we can see the movie version on Thursday. And so we'll go through the main parts, the main passages that are really important and that reflect what Ernest Hemingway was trying to do in terms of the symbolism and the message of the novel. Remember, this is what's known as historical fiction. It's not a history book. It's a novel based on a particular moment in history of which he was a part. Remember, he was an ambulance driver in the volunteer ambulance corps in Italy. And just to rehash a couple of the important points regarding Hemingway's style, remember Ernest Hemingway was a journalist. And so his style of writing reflects that very telegraphic, the short sentences that characterize journalism. People, when they read a newspaper, don't want a whole long drawn out whatever. They want it very concise and succinct. And that's the way he wrote his novels, which was an innovation in that genre of literature, because previously novels were, characterized by long, drawn out sentences overladen with description and all kinds of unending verbiage and everything else. This is very straight to the point. The other thing is that, as we mentioned, unlike previous literary representations of war, this doesn't glorify war at all. And it doesn't glorify the notion of heroism, quite the contrary, both in the character of Henry, Lieutenant Henry, and also in the relationship between Henry and Catherine Barclay and the little world of their own that they're creating, separate and apart from the war. But they meet. They run parallel, actually. The war is a deadly enterprise, right? We know what war represents. Their relationship, despite their attempt to create a world outside of the war, you can't. And it's going to be a tragedy as well. And they're all running parallel to each other. And already the symbols and the foreshadowing appear in the very beginning. Remember that, I think, one of the most powerful scenes of all, in the very beginning, when he describes these soldiers marching down this dusty road, and everything is covered, shrouded with dust, sort of already an allusion to death. But more than that, he describes the soldiers, and they're carrying these boxes in front of them with all sorts of artillery, bullets and so on. And they're wearing a cape, and the cape is covering it. And he describes them looking as though they were far gone in pregnancy, right? Because it gives that image of the swollen belly and so on. But of course, what does Hemingway mean? Birth, pregnancy, gives life. It's life-giving, it's positive. What they're carrying is life snuffing or taking out, right? These are bullets that are going to kill. And it's a foreshadowing and a paradigm for the story of Lieutenant Henry and Catherine Barclay, because I hope you've read this already. She becomes pregnant, but that pregnancy also doesn't yield life. It's not only not going to produce offspring and life, it's going to kill Barclay herself in the process. And these soldiers marching down the road with this pregnant look of bullets underneath their cape, they are not only going to snuff out life with these bullets and the guns that they go in, but the likelihood is they too are not going to survive the war. It's death all around. We briefly spoke about the characters involved here. There's two main characters, of course, are Barclay and Henry. And then there's Rinaldi, the doctor, very negative figure, one who really denigrates females. He's only interested in what they can offer him sexually and so on, so that his relationship or whatever sexual liaisons he has, they're not there either for the purpose of procreation or giving life. And we also read about the bordellos, either for the upper crust, the generals, whatever, or the simple soldiers. But these are, again, institutions whereby men just, satisfy their sexual desires and so on, but again, with no meaning. It's no love is involved here, and certainly no intent to produce offspring. And then there's the priest. Priest also, obviously, because he's celibate, is another example of life ending at a certain point. He's not going to have offspring, right? So everything here suggests the cessation of life, either the taking of life or the lack of desire to produce more life. Everything here is deadly, including some of the descriptions of the landscape with the trees that are either been cut down and reduced to stumps because of the explosives, or because in the winter scenes there are no leaves there, right? Everything is sort of wintry, in the sense that winter represents the cessation of life. Spring is the beginning, things move along, and then in the winter, everything is dead, right? So that's pretty much the atmosphere or the background in which this novel is set. So if you look at chapter 5, which in my edition is page 26, but it's chapter 5. The next afternoon, I went to call on Miss Barclay. Remember, he's been introduced to Catherine Barclay by Rinaldi, who had his own eye on her, but it didn't work out that way. She was not in the garden. I went to the side door of the villa where the ambulances drove up, and I saw the head nurse, who said Miss Barclay was on duty. "There's a war on, you know." I said I knew, right? It's sort of an ironic comment, but it alludes to what's going to be developing in the story. The head nurse, who's busy with everything that's going on there with respect to all these injuries and so on, soldiers that have to be tended to, and she's telling him, there's a war on. In other words, there's no time for you to commence a romance with one of my nurses. And he, very cryptically or whatever, said, "Yeah, I know there's a war." But we're going to find out in the next chapter that he and Catherine Barclay are doing everything they can to make sure, or at least make believe, there isn't a war. "You're an American in the Italian army," she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "How did you happen to do that? Why didn't you join up with us?" "Or what?" "I don't know. Could I join now? I'm afraid not now." All right, what's that all about? They're saying, why didn't you join the Italian army? If you want to fight in the war, America isn't in the war yet. And the truth is, sort of as an aside, as an American, I don't think you're allowed to join the army of a foreign country, which is why many Americans at that point in time who wanted to get involved, for example, in the Spanish Civil War later on, or in the First World War, joined the French Foreign Legion. Because joining the French Foreign Legion was not exactly joining the French army. And it was sort of a loophole to get around it. But I don't know why she would even suggest that he join the Italian army. It's not an Italian. And I don't think you can align yourself with a foreign military group when you're not a citizen of that country. But he says, "I was in Italy and I spoke Italian." "Oh," she said, "I'm learning it. It's a beautiful language." Indeed it is. I have to say, I've been lax. I decided to, in my law practice, have an Italian client at this point in a very long, ongoing legal matter. And she and her brother are my clients. They don't speak English. I don't speak Italian. So we've had to always have either a translator, you know, when there were depositions, do the translation, or she had a family member that lives here in the States, spoke Italian. The lawyer I'm working with is of Italian origin, speaks some Italian, but not a lot. But I always thought such a beautiful language. So I decided a few months ago, I'm going to go on to Duolingo and learn Italian. I mean, I know French, Spanish pretty well. Italian can't be difficult. And many years ago when I was in Italy, I just thought it was just such an incredibly beautiful language. I used to turn the radio on in the hotel room just to listen to it. And indeed it is a very melodic language, very beautiful language. And the point is that this remark about the Italian language being so beautiful, I think what Hemingway is also saying is it's sort of ties into the rest of the theme. He's in Italy. It's the middle of a war, a horrible war. And he's in the ambulance corps, and he's transporting individual soldiers who have been injured in horrific ways. But the language is so beautiful, it's like another escape from the reality of what's going on. And there are all kinds of escapes, as you'll see. So the beauty of the Italian language, I think, is just another one. Let's move along to the very few pages later. It's the last page and a quarter of that 5th chapter. He runs into Barclay, Catherine. It's the top of the page. She was looking at me in the dark. I was angry and yet certain, seeing it all ahead like the moves in a chess game. He did exactly right, I said. I don't mind at all. Poor man. You see, I've been leading a sort of funny life, and I never even talk English. And then you are so very beautiful. I looked at her. You don't need to say a lot of nonsense. I said I was sorry. We do get along. Yes, I said, and we have gotten away from the war. And that's what this relationship is going to be all about. They're going to try and get away from the war. In the middle of the war, they're creating their own world. But you know what? Hemingway is saying, and it becomes very clear at the end, you can't walk away from it. It's the reality that it is, the horror that it is. You can play games and, you know, sort of keep it out of your mind and create your alternative reality, but it's there and it's not going away, and it impacts on everybody, even if you try and ignore it. Yes, I said, and we've gotten away from the war. She laughed. It was the first time I'd ever heard her laugh. I watched her face. You're sweet, she said. No, I'm not. Yes, you are, dear. I'd be glad to kiss you if you don't mind. Previously, when he tried that, she slapped him in the face. I looked in her eyes and put my arm around her as I had before and kissed her. I kissed her hard and held her tight and tried to open her lips, but they were closed tight. I was still angry, and and as I held her, suddenly she shivered. I held her close against me. I could feel her heart beating, and her lips opened, and her head went back against my hand, and then she was crying. Oh, darling, she said, you will be good to me, won't you? What the hell, I thought. I stroked her hair and patted her shoulder. She was crying. This crying, I think, is significant. I think that's also one of the reasons that this novel gets such a negative review from feminists. She does the crying. She's the typical, you know, sort of stereotypic female in this novel, the one with the emotion and so on. Her counterpart, Lieutenant Henry, doesn't seem to be able to cry at all. He barely can muster up any emotion, even at the end. He's sort of, you know, he's like, he's emotionally shut off, like there's ice water in his veins. But we learn that when she speaks with her, she was actually once engaged. And it was a very long engagement. A young man she'd known forever. And I guess he wanted to get married, but then the war broke out and she didn't think it was a good time to do it. And he didn't survive. He was killed early on. I think in the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of the Marne, one of those early battles. So she's been scarred by the war already. And I guess there's this ongoing fear that getting involved with someone is taking a big risk. the middle of the war. Who knows, you know, from one day to the next if they're going to still be around. So, and she's already suffered that loss. He, on the other hand, seems to be sort of oblivious to all of this. And then we get to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is I think, a very important chapter. Short, but significant. It's chapter 6, page 32 in my edition. I was away for 2 days at the post, and when I got home, it was too late. I did not see Miss Barclay until the next evening. She was not in the garden. I had to wait in the office of the hospital until she came down. There were many marble busts on the painted wooden pillars along the walls of the room they used for an office. The hall, too, that the office opened on was lined with them. They had the complete marble quality of all looking alike. It's interesting, this detail, but I think it's also maybe significant in terms of symbolism. Imagine, in your mind, an official, you know, office, government office, and along both sides there's column after column after column, and on each column there's a marble bust of probably some war hero or other, and they all look the same, and basically they're cold. It's marble, it's cold marble. They're not like flesh and blood or, you know, human beings or whatever. And he said they all looked alike. Sculpture had always seemed a dull business. Still, bronzes looked like something, but marble looked like a cemetery. Why? Because when you think of a cemetery, there were all the marble headstones. Again, very telling comment, and a very, you know, significant one in terms of foreshadowing, because the cemetery image pretty much defines what's going on out there, and also foreshadows what's going to happen at the end. There was one fine cemetery, though, the one at Pisa. Jena was the place to see the bad marbles. This had been the villa of a very wealthy German, and the bus must have cost him plenty. All right, so this little, you know, side bar about bus and so on, and marble and cemeteries, again, all reinforcing the image and the atmosphere of death. Okay. Moving along in that chapter, so I can find. Okay, well, actually, you know what? Let's go on. I sat, still the same page. I sat on a chair and held my cap. We were supposed to wear steel helmets, even in Gorizia, but they were uncomfortable and too bloody theatrical in a town where the civilian inhabitants had not been evacuated. I wore one when we went up to the post and carried an English gas mask, right? Important also. And then he says, you know, it's a real mask. Masks are yet another symbol in this story. And they're going to have a more direct impact at the end of the story. We all know by now that one of the innovations or characteristics of the war, especially on the Western Front, was the introduction of poison gas, chemical warfare. That necessitated finding a way to protect the soldiers from the effects of the gas. And what they finally came up with were these gas masks. So the gas mask is a very strong symbol of World War I and that aspect of the war, chemical warfare. But masks have another meaning symbolically. What do masks do? Actually, it's a very appropriate time to talk about it since we're living now in the world of masks. Masks cover, they're a facade, they're a cover-up. They hide what's really behind. And so the gas mask here is not just an allusion or reference to the fighting and the front, but also to the game playing that's going on in the story. When you play a game like Barclay and Henry are doing, you're obscuring, you're covering, you're hiding the reality. When you wear a mask, you're also covering over the reality. So it has that significance, both of those meanings as well. At the end, when Catherine Barclay is about to give birth, and becomes a crisis, and an unfortunate, tragic birth. At one point, she has to be given oxygen, and the oxygen mask is placed on her face. So it's yet another allusion or connection to the mask that we hear about now. Also, earlier on, when Henry came back to his room, when he was sharing with Rinaldi, hanging on the wall was the gas mask, right? So the mask, in its different permutations and meanings, keeps going throughout the novel. And just as a gas mask is to prevent serious injury or death to a soldier when the poison gas comes wafting across no man's land and into the trench, the gas mask, the oxygen mask in the hospital room, in the delivery room, that's supposed to provide oxygen for Catherine Barclay, doesn't work. I mean, it works technically, but it doesn't work in the sense that it provides her with the necessary oxygen to prolong her life. It ends up being ineffective because she's not going to survive this whole thing. So the mask, again, just keeps coming here and there, and it's different symbolic meanings. We were just beginning to get some of them. They were a real mask. Also, we were required to wear an automatic pistol, even doctors and sanitary officers. I felt it against the back of the chair. So again, everything is overladen or overburdened with these different images of death and dying. Middle of that next page, I saw Catherine Barclay coming down the hall and stood up. She did not seem tall walking toward me, but she looked very lovely. "Good evening, Mr. Henry," she said. "How do you do?" I said. The orderly was listening behind the desk. "Shall we sit here or go out to the garden?" "Let's go out. It's much cooler." I walked behind her out into the garden. The orderly looked after us. When we were out on the gravel, she said, "Where have you been?" "I've been out of post." "You could have sent me a note." "No," I said, "not very well. I thought I was coming back." "You ought to have let me know." We were off the driveway, walking under the trees. I took her hands and stopped and kissed her. "Isn't there anywhere we can go?" "No, we have to just walk around here." By the way, when just a few lines earlier, when she comes out and he meets her, what does she say to him? "Good evening, Mr. Henry." I don't think you usually address someone you're involved with or whatever so formally, but they have to act that way because they're walking by the desk with the guard or whatever at the desk, and so they have to make believe that this is not any kind of a relationship between them. It's very upfront and businesslike, right? Again, playing the game, wearing the mask, playing the role or whatever. He asked anywhere we could go. We just have to walk. We've been away a long time. "You've been away a long time. This is the third day, but I'm back now." She looked at me. "And do you love me?" "Yes." "You did say you love me, didn't you?" "Yes." "I lied. I love you. I had not said it before." "And you call me Catherine?" "Catherine." We walked on. I said, "What is that all about?" Henry, Lieutenant Henry, as I said, is a very sanguine guy. Emotion and passion are not his thing. And the idea actually of expressing and confirming this feeling of love, that's not him. Because while Catherine Barclay is portrayed stereotypically as women were seen at that time, he is being portrayed as, the cold-blooded and unemotional male is supposed to be at that time. Anyway, she says to him, "You've come back, haven't you?" "Yes." "I love you so, and it's been awful." "You won't go away." "No, I'll always come back." And it goes on and on and on. And she keeps pressing him, about this. Do you love me? Do you not? Obviously, very insecure woman. But then remember, she's lost her first fiance, her first, serious relationship anyway, in the war. The guy died on the front. Okay. So now look at chapter 7. I came back the next afternoon from our first mountain post and stopped the car at the Smistimento, where the wounded and the sick were sorted by their papers, and the papers marked for different hospitals. I'd been driving and sat in the car, and the driver took the papers and so on. He describes that whole event. But what's important in this chapter, so I'm going to sort of cut to the quick. He's having a discussion with the ambulance drivers and the wounded and so on. He's totally detached. It's just like every one of these wounded is just a piece of paper that has to be filled out or whatever. Even the whole discussion of the war, he seems totally, he's there doing what he has to do, but totally detached really from the war that's going on. But in this chapter, he seems at least somewhat to increase his feelings towards Catherine Barclay. But he hasn't completely let that emotion go, fall out, whatever. And then at one point, it's very strange. Catherine Barclay pretends that he is her dead lover. Then makes the remark, or she makes a remark about this game playing. We're both playing a game. And very significant because they are playing a game. Right? They're making believe that their world is separate and apart from the war that's going on outside, and that they can escape it by creating this drama of theirs, or this fictional world in which they alone live and relate without the recognition or acknowledgement of what's really going on. And the game playing goes on. At one point, more than one point, all of a sudden, Lieutenant Henry gets drunk. He's always plying alcohol. And he makes the comment, that drinking, getting into a drunken stupor is yet another way of escaping reality. I guess that's why people drink, is to escape whatever it is that's burdening them or hurting them or bothering them at the time. So it's yet another means of escape. Now we move to chapter 10. What happens basically is he's wounded, but even his being wounded, Henry, doesn't seem to affect his stoicism. He's tough, he's hard, and nothing is going to undermine his manliness, or whatever. And then when his buddy, Dr. Rinaldi, suggests, you've just been wounded, and that entitles you to a medal. You've been wounded in action, although one could argue being an ambulance driver maybe isn't quite the same action as carrying a weapon on the front line, but Rinaldi is a superficial and, really unsympathetic guy. Says, look, you earned a medal. Don't you want the medal? And he doesn't, right? He's not really interested in heroism or whatever. And again, as part of his sort of stoic behavior, he's sort of cold in many ways, doesn't really care, and basically believes, I did what I have to do. He believes in loyalty. I was injured, true, performing the task that I was set to do, but that certainly doesn't merit, getting any kind of a medal or whatever. And Rinaldi just keeps pressing it. And he said, well, we'll embellish it. We'll say, you saved a whole bunch of people, besides, on and on it goes. But the guy is, total falsehood anyway, Rinaldi. Then Rinaldi talks again about all these beautiful women and beautiful girls, and visits the brothels and so on. And basically, he sort of embodies or personifies this overactive, male sexual drive, whatever. But then along comes the priest in this chapter, and the priest, of course, obviously has a different take on what's going on, and the priest believes, just merely, engaging in these sexual, encounters with the opposite sex really isn't a very ultimately satisfying activity. It doesn't really have much substance to it. But the priest believes that Lieutenant Henry actually lacks, what's missing in his life is someone to truly love, to have a meaningful connection with. But of course, Henry rejects that idea and protests the whole thing. And again, very much aloof and unemotional. Because after all, says the priest, what is the essence of truly loving someone? It makes you want to give yourself over to the other person. You sort of separate yourself from yourself. It requires a certain selflessness and the focus on the next one, which is really not what he's all about. But as the story moves on, Henry probably will, to a certain degree, come close to that selflessness. And so at the end of chapter 10, the last few paragraphs, basically it's Rinaldi speaking. Don't be angry, take a drink, so I must go. You're a good old boy. And now you see, I'm sorry, this is, right, Rinaldi. Now you see, underneath we are the same. We are brothers. No, I'm just more affectionate, says Rinaldi. I felt his breath come toward me. Goodbye, I come to see you again soon. I won't kiss you if you don't want. I'll send your English girl. Goodbye, the cognac is under the bed. Get well. He was gone. So these characters in Farewell to Arms are always seeking some sort of solace. And very often it comes, like I said, in the form of alcohol. So one scene after another, there's always the cognac and the other things that they're drinking and so on, and becomes huge amounts of alcohol at various points. And, and basically when this alcohol is consumed, it is again an allusion to this desire to escape reality. And then remember when the nurse, I think it was Van Kampen, comes up to Henry's room, he asked for more liquor. She won't give it to him. And it's against the rules, right? So he finds a way to smuggle it in. And the alcohol becomes his means of escape from life and from the reality around him. In the meantime, the relationship, of course, is moving forward with Catherine Barclay, and they sort of envision a post-World War I world with the small house and the picket fence and the kids and everything else. And then an unfortunate turn of events. They're separated, and she is communicating, she's writing to him, but the letters are being intercepted and being kept from him. And so he's not answering her. And she is desperate to know what's going on. And she has no idea that someone has intentionally cut them off for reasons of jealousy, this Rinaldi, and bitterness. And in the meantime, she's pregnant. So look at chapter 19. the summer went that way. I didn't remember much about the days except they were hot and there were many victories in the papers. I was very healthy and my legs healed quickly, so it was not very long after I was first on crutches before I was through with them and walking with a cane. Right? I'd been injured and all the shrapnel and everything else, but now he was getting better. And then I started treatments for bending the knees and mechanical treatments, baking in a box of mirrors with violet rays and massage and baths and so on. I went over there afternoons and afterwards stopped at the cafe and had a drink and read the papers. I did not roam around the town, but wanted to get home to the hospital from the cafe. All I wanted was to see Catherine. Right. So at this point, he's starting to recover, but he's also clearly more attached to her and more desirous of her. The rest of the time, I was glad to kill. Mostly, I slept in the mornings and the afternoons. Sometimes I went to the races and late to my mechanotherapy treatments. Sometimes I stopped in the Anglo-American Club and sat in a deep leather cushioned chair in front of the window and read the magazines. They would not let us go out together when I was off crutches because unseemly for a nurse to be seen unchaperoned with a patient, right? And she's the nurse, Catherine, and he's the patient now. So again, they had to play this sort of game. So we're not together much in the afternoons, although sometimes we could go out to dinner if Ferguson went along, another nurse. Miss Van Kampen, the head nurse, had accepted the status that we were great friends because she got a great amount of work out of Catherine. So she went along with us. She thought Catherine came from very good people and that prejudiced her in her favor, finally. Miss Van Kampen admired family very much and came from an excellent family herself. The hospital was quite busy too, and that kept her occupied. It was a hot summer, and I knew many people in Milano, but always was anxious to get back home to the hospital as soon as the afternoon was over. At the front, they were advancing on the Carso. They had taken Cook across from Plava and were taking the Banziza Plateau. All right, it's very interesting how Hemingway intersperses historical events and reality with the fictional drama that's going on in the novel. And this is one example. These are actual battles. And this is what's going on at this point in time in the war. So the war sort of infiltrates the romance or whatever that's going on in this narrative. By the way, Italy, of course, we didn't talk about the Italian participation, it's too much, but the Italians in World War I, remember, were with the Allies, even though by treaty and alliance they would have been with Germany and Austria, but they opted for an alliance or to take part in the war on the side of the Allies. The reason being, they were promised that when the war is over, they would regain some of the territory that they'd lost to Austria-Hungary over the years. So that was the incentive. They didn't get it, but they went along with this. It's interesting to read the accounts on the Italian front, because if you look at a map, the northern part of Italy at a certain point abuts Austria. But Austria was on the heights, looking down in Tyrolean Alps. The Italians were down below. So, you can imagine what the situation was. Better to have control of the higher elevations, because then you're shooting down, which is a lot easier than shooting your weapons up. And so the Italians suffered terribly on that front. But the point is that Hemingway every once in a while interjects these references to actual battles and the actual situation of the war, so that the total fantasy or make-believe world of the characters is suddenly infiltrated by reality. The Italians were using up an awful amount of men. I did not see how it could go on. Even if they took all of them, Ziza and Monte San Gabriele, there were plenty of mountains beyond for the Austrians, because, like I said, they're shooting down. So not looking good. Towards the end of that chapter, Very interesting. The very last page of that chapter. We were talking softly out on the balcony, he and Catherine. The moon was supposed to rise, but there was a mist over the town, and it didn't come up. In a little while, it started to drizzle, and we came in. Outside, the mist turned to rain. In a little while, it was raining hard, and we heard it drumming on the roof. I got up and stood at the door to see if it was raining in, but it wasn't, so I left. Who else did you see? Catherine asked. Mr. and Mrs. Myers. They're a strange lot. He's supposed to have been in the penitentiary at home. They let him out to die. And he lived happily in Milan forever after. I don't know how happily enough after jail, I should think. She's bringing some things here. She brings splendid things. Were you her dear boy? What of them? You're all her dear boys, Catherine said. She refers to dear boys. Listen to it rain. It's raining hard. And you'll always love me, won't you? Yes. And the rain won't make any difference? No. That's good, because I'm afraid of the rain. Why? I was sleepy. Outside, the rain was falling steadily. I don't know. I've always been afraid of the rain. I like it. I like to walk in it, but it's very hard and loving. I love you always. I love you in the rain and in the snow and in the hail or whatever else. I don't know. I guess I'm sleepy. Go to sleep. I'll love you no matter how it is. You're not really afraid of the rain, are you? Not when I'm with you. Why are you afraid of it? I don't know. Tell me. Don't make me. Tell me. All right. I'm afraid of the rain because sometimes I see me dead in it. And sometimes I see you dead in it. It's more likely. No, it's not, because I can keep you safe. I know I can, but nobody can help themselves. Please stop it. I want you to get scotch and crazy tonight. We won't be together much longer. No, but I am scotch and crazy. But I'll stop it. It's all nonsense. Yes, it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. It's only nonsense. I'm not afraid of the rain. I'm not afraid of the rain. Oh God, I wish I wasn't. She was crying, and I comforted her, and she stopped crying, but outside it kept on raining. All right. So, what's this thing with rain? And this thing, she's afraid because she sees herself dead in the rain. And she sees him dead in the rain. Well, again, it's a foreshadowing, because if you read the whole novel, you know that the night she dies in childbirth, it's raining. And, but you know, why rain? What is it about rain that's so significant in this novel? I think the answer goes back to the very beginning, and sort of the contradictory images or notions that these symbols represent. For example, to go back to those soldiers in the beginning of marching down the road that look like they're pregnant because their capes are covering over a box of bullets or whatever, right? Again, not to belabor the point, but pregnancy should be a positive thing, gives life. No, they look as though they are, but what they're really carrying in front of them is not new life, it's a means of ending life, right? Bullets. Rain is an interesting phenomenon. Without rain, there's no life. There's no vegetation. There's no growth. You need rain, to bring forth the crops and the fruits and everything else. But rain, when it's very severe, like this, rain when it's, stormy, leads to the opposite. It's destructive. And then there are the floods and everything else. So it's just another example of a very powerful image, very, pardon the pun, pregnant image, full of meaning. It's at once life-giving and positive. On the other hand, in its extreme, or when it's, too much, it produces the exact opposite. And here it's going to be, again, tied to the end of the story and the fate of Catherine Barclay, because that night she's going to die, but it's going to be raining terribly outside there. In the meantime, when they're separated and he finally finds out what's happened and he desperately wants to get to her, he has to go through a horrible storm, all kinds of rain and thunder and everything else, right? So these images, that's what literature is all about. It's about using certain literary tools, metaphors, similes, personification, and so on and so forth, right? It's a novel. So this scene with all of the rain and the fear of the rain is really connects to the sort of contradictory images of life and death that we had before, and also is going to connect to the end of the novel as well. If you go forward to chapter 22, which in my edition is page 132, but anyways, chapter 22. It turned cold that night. The next day it was raining. Coming home from the Ospedale Maggiore, it's the big hospital, it rained very hard and I was wet when I came in. Up in my room, the rain was coming down heavily outside the balcony and the wind blew it against glass doors. So rain increasingly becomes something dangerous and foreboding. I changed my clothing, drank some brandy, but the brandy didn't taste good. I felt sick in the night. In the morning, after breakfast, I was nauseated. This is no doubt about it, the house surgeon said. Look at the whites of his eyes, miss. Miss Gage looked. They had me look in the glass. The whites of the eyes were yellow, and it was jaundiced. I was sick for 2 weeks. Now, not surprising that he's suffering from jaundice. There are many ways that you can contract that horrible disease, but one way is, abusing your liver by drinking too much. But jaundice also has another meaning. When you say of a person that they have a jaundiced view of things, it means they have an improper perspective. They're not looking at things properly, right? So maybe his view of things is also jaundiced. But clearly all the wine and all the liquor and all the brandy and everything else has affected his liver. So now he's suffering from that. And a few lines later, one day while I was in bed with jaundice, Ms. Van Kampen, the nurse, came in the room, opened the door into the armoire, a cabinet, and saw the empty bottles there. Empty bottles of liquor that or whatever that he'd been drinking behind her back because he had them smuggled in. I had sent a load of them down by the porter. I believe she must have seen them going out and come up to find some more. There were mostly vermouth bottles, Marsala bottles, Capri bottles, empty Chianti flasks, and a few cognac bottles. Man, this guy really likes to drink. The porter had carried out the large bottles, those that held vermouth and the straw-covered Chianti flasks, and left the brandy bottles for the last. It was the brandy bottles, the bottles shaped like a bear, which had held Kümmel, which is sort of a grain liquor, it's German, that Ms. Van Kampen found. The bear-shaped bottle enraged her particularly. She held it up. The bear was sitting on its haunches with his paws up, and there was a cork in the glass head and a few sticky crystals on the bottom. I laughed. It is Kümmel, I said. The best Kümmel comes in those bear-shaped bottles, comes from Russia. The Russian bear. Those are all brandy bottles, aren't they? I can't see them all, I said, probably. How long has this been going on? I bought them and brought them in myself, I said. I've had Italian officers visit me frequently. I have to keep brandy, to offer them. You haven't been drinking yourself, she said. I have also drunk it myself. Brandy, 11 empty bottles of brandy and that other stuff, right? And then she said, and I'm pitying you because you got jaundice and basically brought it upon yourself. So again, the drinking and the escapism. Another example. Look at chapter 24. I walked down the stairs instead of taking the elevator, and the carpet on the stairs was worn. I had paid for the dinner when it came up, and the waiter who brought it was sitting on a chair near the door. He jumped up and bowed, and I went with him into the side room and paid the bill. The managers in the hotel had remembered me as a friend and refused payment in advance, but when he retired, he had remembered to have the waiter stationed at the door said I should not get out without paying. I suppose that had happened even with his friends, when there's so many friends in a war. I asked the waiter to get us a carriage, and he took Catherine's package that I was carrying and went out with an umbrella. It's raining. Outside through the window, we saw him crossing the street in the rain. We stood at the side room and looked out the window. How do you feel, Cat? Sleepy. I feel hollow and hungry. Have you anything to eat? Yes, in my musette. I saw the carriage coming. I stopped, the horse head hanging in the rain, and the waiter stepped out, opened his umbrella, and came toward the hotel. Right. So now they've sort of reconnected after this unfortunate separation and found each other after all this, suffering and recriminations and all of the misunderstandings and so on. But she is, of course, now pregnant and in the final stages. I'm going to skip, actually, to the very end. It's chapter 39. And in chapter 39, of course, all of this comes together. All the symbols, all the foreshadowing, and all of the reality that they've tried to suppress by creating the little fantasy land. And basically, I'll summarize what's going to happen here. At this point, Henry and Catherine have all these sort of little domestic rituals that they put together in the first half of this section, and they're happy together, and they're distanced and cut off from the outside world. It's in chapter 39, but then you know the next chapter, chapter 40, and there's a German attack that's mentioned and spoken about in that chapter. But that German attack is sort of juxtaposed with their little domestic pleasant world they've created. And it said it was March 1918. Now, get a specific date. Again, Hemingway has sort of interrupted the flow of the narrative and this, fictional story with a dose of reality, a specific time, March 1918. So March 1918 is going to be the last spring of the war. The war is going to end in November, actually, of 1918, actually November 11th, which means the anniversary of the end of World War I is actually tomorrow, right? So there's this juxtaposition of their world and the real world that's out there, their ideal world and the world of war and death. Also, sort of the priorities or the immediate desires of these two characters. One, Catherine, who wants to make love. Henry, who wants to play chess, of all things. Why chess? Because their whole fantasy drama is a chess game. I'm moving here, you move your pawn there, right? The whole thing is a game of chess. Actually, war is a game of chess. So it's a very appropriate symbol, I guess, for what's going on. And the ultimate death of Catherine, I guess, is also foreshadowed, as it has already been elsewhere in the novel. Also, she, I guess, is concerned and worried about what childbirth is going to entail. And so I'm not sure what the logic is here, but she figured it'd be better if the child were small, if the fetus were small. So in order to keep it small, she decides to drink beer. Again, the introduction of alcohol. So this is chapter 39. By the middle of January, I had heard I'm sorry, but in the military, I had a beard, and the winter had settled into bright, cold days and hard, cold nights. We could walk on the roads again. The snow was packed hard and smooth by the hay sleds and wood sledges and the logs that were hauled down the mountain. Right, they're in Switzerland now. They've finally gotten back together. She was in Switzerland, he was in Italy, and they realized what was going on and why there was no communication. So now he makes his way to her. The snow lay over all the country down almost to Montreux, which is the southern part of Switzerland that borders France. The mountains on the other side of the lake were all white, and on the plain of the Rhone Valley was covered. We took long walks on the other side of the mountain to the Bain de l'Alliance. Catherine wore hobnailed boots and a cape and carried a stick with a sharp steel point. Again, this should be a sort of trigger, a connection with the very beginning, right? The soldiers wearing the cape looked like they were pregnant, carrying their weapons with them as they marched along in their boots, right? She is attired in hobnailed boots and obviously pregnant with the cape covering her, right? So another parallel with the beginning. She didn't look big with the cape, and we would not walk too fast, but stopped and sat on logs by the roadside. There was an inn in the trees on the Bain de l'Alliance where the woodcutters stopped to drink, and we sat inside warm by the stove and drank hot red wine with spices and lemon in it, better known in German as Glühwein. They called They called it Glühwein, should be with capital G. And it was a good thing to warm you and to celebrate with. The beginning was dark and smoky inside, and afterward, when you went out in the cold air, it came sharply into your lungs and numbed the edge of your nose as you inhaled. We looked back at the inn with light coming from the windows and the woodcutters' horses stamping and jerking their heads and so on. So they sort of settled into this nice little pattern. Switzerland's a beautiful country, which I might add is also not for real. It's another fantasy land in many ways, but here they are happily together and anticipating birth and drinking Glühwein and enjoying the winter scenery of Switzerland. And then towards the end of chapter 39, she tells him, "I love your beard," Catherine said. "It's a great success." He's grown a beard. Why? If we're looking at the symbolism that we've, talked about all the way through, what does a beard symbolize? Well, a beard, and this is like a very Freudian kind of interpretation, a beard is yet another way of covering. It's like a mask. It's another way of covering up the reality. So at this point, he's bearded. It's a great success. It looks so stiff and fierce, and it's very soft and a great pleasure. Do you like it better than without? I think so. I'm not going to cut my hair now until after young Catherine's born. I assume it's going to be a baby girl who they would name for the mother. I look too big and matronly now, but after she's born and I'm thin again, I'm going to cut it. And then I'll be a fine, new, and different girl for you, right? She's obviously concerned that she's not all that attractive anymore, being almost ready to give birth. We'll go together and get it cut, or I'll go alone and come and surprise you. I didn't say anything. You won't say I can't, will you? No, I think it would be exciting. All right. So this is the plan for after the birth. She at least is going to cut her hair and make herself look different and more appealing. He's not committing yet to cutting the beard. Look at chapter 40. We had a fine life. We lived through the months of January and February, and the winter was very fine, and we were very happy. There had been short thaws when the wind blew warm and the snow softened and the air felt like spring, but always the clear, hard cold had come again, and the winter had returned. In March came the first break in the winter. In the night it started raining. Not a good sign. It rained on all morning and turned the snow to slush and made the mountainside dismal. There were clouds over the lake and over the valley. It was raining high up in the mountain. Catherine wore heavy overshoes and I wore Mr. Guttingen's rubber boots, and we walked to the station under an umbrella, to the slush and the running water that was washing the ice of the roads bare, to stop at the pub before lunch for a vermouth, drinking. Outside, we could hear the rain. But the rain, again, not to belabor the point, we know rain, not a good sign, very ominous. What is the rain doing here? The rain is washing away the snow and turning it to slush. What is the snow? We sort of discussed this earlier on in a couple of instances. Snow is one of those masks. It's one of those things that covers up what's underneath. So the hard, rainfall is destroying the mask. It's washing away the covering. And when the cover is gone, the reality suddenly appears. And we're getting close to the uncovering of the reality in the lives of these two figures, Catherine and Henry, and the reality outside that they've been trying to avoid as their romance progressed. Do you think we ought to move into town? What do you think? If the winter is over and the rain keeps up, it won't be fun up here. How long is it about before young Catherine? How much longer we got to go? About a month, perhaps a little more. We might go down and stay in Montreux. Why don't we go to Lausanne? And that's where the hospital is, where she's going to give birth. All right, but I thought maybe that was too big a town. We can be as much alone in bigger town, and Lausanne might be nice. When should we go? So remember, they are no longer in Italy where they met, and where he was the ambulance driver and she was the nurse, and the war was all around them as he transported the wounded and she tended to the wounded. Now they've gone to neutral Switzerland. No war going on in Switzerland. There's never a war going on in Switzerland. Switzerland is a neutral country and a very, very beautiful country. Love Switzerland. Beautiful mountains, the Alps, and the lakes, and everything else. It's not for real. It's just, they make great watches and cuckoo clocks, and they keep your money, but somehow or other, all those alpine mountain ranges seem to ring Switzerland and keep it removed from reality also. So it's not coincidental that at the end of the story, as they progressively try and block out the war, they end up in Switzerland. No war in Switzerland, it's neutral. And she's getting close to having the baby. Okay. Look at, getting close to the end and we're running out of time. So look at chapter 41. Right. Chapter 41, we're almost at the end. One morning, I woke about 3 o'clock hearing Catherine stirring in bed. Are you all right? I've been having some pains. Regularly? Not very. If you have them at all regularly, we'll go to the hospital. I was very sleepy and went back to sleep. A little while later, I woke again. Maybe you'd better call up the doctor, Catherine said. I think maybe this is it. I went to the phone and called the doctor. How often are the pains coming? How often are they coming? I should think every quarter of an hour. You should go to the hospital then, the doctor said. I will dress and go there right away myself. I hung up, called the garage near the station to send up a taxi. No one answered the phone for a long time, and I finally got a man who promised to send a taxi at once. Catherine was dressing. Her bag was all full, packed, and with the things she would need at the hospital and the baby things. Outside in the hall, I rang for the elevator. There was no answer. I went downstairs. There was no one downstairs except the night watchman. I brought the elevator up myself, put Catherine's bag in it. She stepped in, and we went down. The night watchman opened the door for us, and we sat outside on the stone slabs beside the stairs, down the driveway, and waited for the taxi. The night was clear. The stars were out. Catherine was very excited. All right. At this point, the night is clear. Looks good. A lot of stars. About to give birth. This is the end of the story. I'm so glad it started. Now a little while, it will all be over. You're a good, brave girl. I'm not afraid. I wish the taxi would come, though. We heard it coming up the street and saw its headlights. We turned into the driveway, and I helped Catherine in, and the driver put the bag up front. Drive to the hospital. We went to the driveway, started up the hill. At the house we went in, and I carried the bag. There was a woman at the desk who wrote down Catherine's name, age, address, relatives, and religion in the book. She said she had no religion, and the woman drew a line in the space after the word, and she gave her name as Catherine Henry. They're not married, but she's using his name again, sort of a further subterfuge in a sense. I mean, it's another, I guess, aspect of the game playing, by assuming his name, even though legally it was not her name yet. And she's continuing to have these labor pains and so on. Then in the middle of the next page, the pains came quite regularly and then slackened off, and Catherine was very excited. When the pains were bad, she called them good. When they started to fall off, she was disappointed. Why are they good? Because if they were really intense and coming, that this is it, it's finally going to happen. And then they would sort of slacken off. You go out, she said. I think you are just making me self-conscious. Her face tied up. There, that was better. I so want to be a good wife and have this child without any foolishness. Please go and get some breakfast and then come back. I won't miss you. The nurse is very good, splendid to me. You have plenty of time for breakfast, the nurse said. I'll go then. Goodbye, and have a fine breakfast for me too. Where can I get breakfast? I asked the nurse. There's a cafe down the street at the square. It should be open now. Outside it was getting light. I walked down the empty street to the cafe. There was a light in the window. I went in and stood at the zinc bar, and an old man served me a glass of white wine and a brioche. The brioche was yesterday's. I dipped it in the wine and then drank a glass of coffee. What do you do at this hour? The old man asked. My wife is in labor in the hospital. Ah, so I wish you good luck. Give me another glass of wine. He poured it from the bottle, slopping it over a little so some ran down on the zinc. I drank the glass, paid, and went out. Outside, along the street, were the refuse cans from the houses waiting for the collector. The dog was nosing at one of the cans. What do you want? I asked, and looked in the can to see if there was anything I could pull out for him. There was nothing on top but coffee grounds, dust, and some dead flowers. There isn't anything, dog, I said. The dog crossed the street. I went up the stairs in the hospital to the floor Catherine was on and sat down the hall to her room. I knocked on the door and there was no answer. I opened the door and the room was empty, except for Catherine's bag on a chair and her dressing gown hanging on a hook on the wall. Remember, way back in the beginning, hanging on the hook on the wall in his room was the gas mask. I went out and down the hall, looking for somebody. I found a nurse. Where is Madame Henry? A lady has just gone to the delivery room. Where is it? I'll show you. She took me down to the end of the hall. The door of the room was partly open. I could see Catherine lying on a table covered by a sheet. I mean, up to that point, covered by a sheet because that's what they do when you're about to give birth and whatever. But covered by a sheet is sort of ominous here, sort of a foreshadowing. The nurse was on one side. The doctor stood on the other side of the table beside some cylinders. The doctor held a rubber mask attached to a tube in one hand. Again, the mask. What is the rubber mask? It's probably an oxygen mask. But so far, masks have had all sorts of connotations, and some of them not good, like the gas mask. I'll give you a gown, you can go in, the nurse said. Come in here, please. She put a white gown on me and pinned it at the neck and back with a safety pin. Now you can go in. I went into the room. Hello, Donna Catherine said in a strained voice. I'm not doing much. You are Mr. Henry, the doctor asked. Yes. How is everything going? Things are going very well, the doctor said. We came in here where it is easy to give gas for the pains. In other words, the labor pains are becoming more intense. The gas he's talking about is like nitrous oxide or something that kills the pain. But in the context of this novel and the context of the story and the war, when you hear the word gas, it's not good, right? And in this case, it's not going to be good because the pains are not going to end up the way everyone expects. A lot of pain, but no gain, so as to speak. I want it now, Catherine said. But the pain is getting worse. She wants more of this nitrous oxide or whatever this is killing the pain. Doctor placed the rubber mask over her face and turned a dial, and I watched. Catherine breathing deeply and rapidly, and then she pushed the mask away. The doctor shut off the petcock. That wasn't a very big one. I had a very big one a while ago. The doctor made me go clear out. Didn't you, doctor? Then, a few paragraphs later, another pain. It wasn't much, Catherine said. She smiled. I'm a fool about the gas. It's wonderful. Well, it's covering the pain, but things aren't so wonderful. And then on the next page, she is talking to Lieutenant Henry. Says, "You're so lovely." She was a little drunk from the gas. And as we saw throughout this novel, drunk was a defensive mechanism. It was a means of escape. The gas, in this case, is a means of avoiding the pain. So she's drunk from the gas, a lot of avoidance, right? A lot of covering over. And now we're a day later, right? On the next page. The day was cloudy, but the sun was trying to come through. So from that starry, clear night, we're now in the cloudy day. And the sun is trying to peek through, but a lot of clouds. And then a few lines later, "You're drunk." I said, "I know it," Catherine said, "but you shouldn't say it." And then, "Give it to me, give it to me." She clutched hold of the mask and breathed short and deep, pantingly, making the respirator click. And then she gave a long sigh, and the doctor reached with his left hand and lifted the mask away. That was a very big one, a lot of pain, Catherine said, her voice very strange. "I'm not going to die now, darling. I'm past where I was going to die. Aren't you glad?" "Don't you get in that place again." "I won't. I'm not afraid of it, though. I won't die." "You will not do any such foolishness," the doctor said. "You would not die and leave your husband." "Oh, no, I won't. I won't die. I really won't. It's silly to die." And there's the pain again. And she asked for the gas again. I went out the door and down the hall to the room where Catherine was to be after the baby came. I sat in a chair there and looked at the room. I had the paper in my coat that I had bought when I went out for lunch and read it. It was beginning to be dark outside, and I turned the light on to read. Right? Why is it getting dark outside? Because those clouds are getting thicker, and the rain is imminent. After a while, I stopped reading, turned off the light, and watched it get dark. I wondered why the doctor didn't send for me. Maybe it was better I was away. He probably wanted me away for a while. I looked at my watch. If he did not send for me in 10 minutes, I would go down anyway. Poor, poor cat. And this was the price you paid for sleeping together. This was the end of the trap. This was what people got for loving each other. Thank God for gas, anyway. What must it have been like before there were anesthetics? Once it started, there were mill rates. Catherine had a good time in the time of pregnancy. It wasn't bad. She was hardly ever sick. She was not awfully uncomfortable until toward the last. So now they got her in the end. You never got away with anything. Get away, hell. It would have been the same if we had been married 50 times. And what if she should die? She won't. She won't die. People don't die in childbirth nowadays. That was what all husbands thought. Yes, but what if she should die? She won't. She's just having a bad time. And then again, but what if she did? She can't, right? Again, in the back of his mind, he's suddenly thinking, this isn't going exactly the way he planned. What if she actually did? And she was always so afraid, but she can't, because you don't die in childbirth, you give life in childbirth. But as we've seen all the way through the story, what appears to be life-giving ends up being life-taking. And that's the essence of war. You have these young men in the prime of life. They should have their whole future ahead of them. but war cuts the life short. And even though they've tried to escape the reality of the war, this reality is going to come home to roost, because like all of the death and all of the dying and all the young lives snuffed out there in the war, it's going to come home in a very personal way to them. Their attempt to make believe it isn't there isn't going to work. And then they talk about a cesarean, right? Because obviously things aren't going well. Cesarean, they sort of cut the abdomen, take the baby out. And then talk about operating and so on. So it's getting worse by the moment, right? And then a few pages later, finally, a new doctor came in and 2 nurses, and they lifted Catherine onto a wheeled stretcher, and we started down the hall. Stretcher went rapidly, oh my gosh, we're running out of time, down the hall and so on. Anyway, what happened is one of the doctors puts a mask on her face, and he sees what's going on again, the mask, the face mask. What's going to happen at the end is, of course, the baby, which wouldn't have been a girl at all, would have been a boy. The baby is a stillbirth. That's why it's not exiting. So the baby is dead on arrival. And now Catherine starts hemorrhaging. I guess an appropriate end to a war novel. The blood is flowing all through all the years of the war, which is about to end, by the way, as we noted, right? And now her end is going to be through the bleeding, right? Loss of blood, and things get worse. And of course, what happens in the end, they tell him, sorry, the child was a stillbirth, wasn't even alive. And unfortunately, your wife has bled to death. And then he walks out. The last lines. I don't want to talk about it. I said, I would like to take you to your hotel. No, thank you. He went down the hall, went to the door of the room. You can't come in now, one of the nurses said. Yes, I can. You can't. You get out. But after I had got them out and shut the door and turned off the light, it wasn't any good. It was like saying goodbye to a statue, because his wife is lying there, bloodless and white, like a statue, like the ones we saw earlier in that office setting in the building back in Italy, with the pillars and the marble busts, right, that he couldn't stand because they're so unlifelike. They remind him of a cemetery. Well, it was a foreshadowing. Now his wife looks like a statue, right? White and cold, dead. After a while, I went out and left the hospital. I walked back to the hotel in the rain. So, indeed, that rain was not a good omen. And she prophetically saw her death in the rain. So, it ends, the novel ends in tragedy. Her death fails to initiate an epiphany in Henry. Right? He's still the cold-blooded, stoic guy he was to begin with. The realization that has come only confirms the novel's big theme. What is the focus of the novel? That love and war lead to loss. And there's no compensation. Right? There's no upside to all of this. The storm with which the novel reminds the reader of her fear of rain is indeed a prophecy. And in chapter 19, if you go all the way back, she speaks about an unidentifiable malevolence in the world. Some evil in the world, as she mentions in chapter 19 to him. And the rain that now falls as we leave the hospital signals the same destructive forces. There is an evil in the world, and the evil is war, and it's destructive and it's deadly, and everyone else is powerless and speechless and hopeless. And so the novel seems to suggest that there is no positive ending. There is no epiphany, a moment of insight or whatever. So there's no more promising, perspective on all of this. The point is that, as Ernest Hemingway was trying to show throughout, war is just not justifiable. It's not heroic. It's not ennobling. It's what it is. It's a harbinger of death and loss of life. And the parallel between his relationship with Catherine and the war outside finally comes together. They've been running parallel. Now they come together at the end of the novel. This is the great American World War I novel. We'll see the movie version on Thursday. Then we're going to get to the great German World War I novel, which is one of the greatest pieces of pacifist literature of all time, All Quiet on the Western Front. We'll see the movie to that also. So, are there any questions about? Are there any questions about All Quiet on the Western Front? I'm sorry, about Farewell to Arms. And again, on Thursday, we'll see the movie, great movie, a little classic with Helen Hayes and Jane Stewart, two great figures in the world of cinema, and a very, I think, an excellent adaptation of the novel onto the screen. So yeah, any questions or? Okay, so I'll see you all again on Thursday morning, and we'll see the movie. So
have a good one.
You take care, everyone stay well, and get your popcorn ready for Thursday. Okay, see you then.
All right, Professor.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Professor, I have a question about
Sure.
the term paper.
Yeah.
So I can find in the syllabus the information what is about the term paper.
No, there's if you go to Blackboard, there's a tab that says paper topics. And then you choose a topic from the list on Blackboard.
Oh, okay. So I have to choose one.
Choose one.
How many pages is going to be?
Figure 10 to 12 double spaced.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank
you.
And
on the syllabus also, there's this whole long list of World War I related books and so on. So once you decide on the topic, I'm sure you'll find plenty of sources on that list of bibliography to use. You need only 5 sources.
Oh, okay.
But if you have a problem, email me and I'll help you out, with finding something.
Okay, thank you.
Not bad. That's 2 pages per source. All right.
Well, I wouldn't exactly look at it that way. You're using these sources for information, right? And then when you get all the information, then you obviously write the term paper. I mean, I know it's 2 pages per source, but I mean, have you had any of you had the experience of writing a term paper for any class?
A term paper, if it's a regular.
A research paper for any of your other classes?
Yeah, of course.
You know what? I have an idea. You know what? Remind me. Well, I'll tell you what. Remind me Thursday, and what I could do is Thursday, let's say around 5 o'clock, we can have a Zoom session and just talk about the term paper.
11 or 5?
No, at 5. 11 o'clock's the class, but then this would be separate.
Oh, all right.
But remind me on Thursday, so.
All right, no problem.
And then anyone has questions, and I'll speak about how to do the term paper, and if anyone has questions, then you can ask at that time.
All right, no problem.
Okay. Take care.